What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining from whatever time zone you're in. I'm always flattered because I always thought I was an ambitious person, but then it was like, I don't know, should I do this session or should I just watch a 7-year-old TED Talk later? You have a lot of options with the internet to seek inspiration and guidance and knowledge. And so I'm flattered that you joined. And thanks, LIA, for having me, because you guys barely even know the subject of what I'm talking about. I gave you a little paragraph, but like, for all you know, I could have a complete fucking just mental breakdown right now. And there's just nothing you could do about it. So I'm not going to do that. I have prepared some slides and some thoughts. And so the subject of this is called Creative Director Life and the Meaning of Life. And really, this is a talk that I want to give that, my assumption is that everybody on this call is at an agency, either sort of a junior or a mid-level, and you're ambitious enough that in the middle of your day, you're carving out time to listen to me. So, you obviously have a certain ambition, and a drive and dreams about your career. And so I just want to share some things with you that I think start to at least address one of the flaws in our industry, which is this, which is that when you get promoted to the role of creative director, it often goes like this. Hey, you're doing a great job as a creative, and your reward is now you're a creative director, which is a role that actually requires a bunch of different skills from those that earned you the promotion in the first place. And we'll find out if you're good at those skills by basically giving you the job with no previous training. Best of luck. We're counting on you. Don't fuck it up. And so, there's kind of just a fascinating contradiction to that. And I know a lot of my friends who became creative directors and went on to be ECDs and CCOs, they struggled with this. And there's not really a playbook for this kind of contradiction of you find out if you're good at the parts of the creative director and management job separate of the creative part only through on-the-job training. And so my hope in a talk like this is just to share some thoughts with you in advance of your promotion to ACD and CD and beyond. Some things that I wish some people had told me, and some things that I've picked up along the way that I thought, man, if I can ever sort of impart this to people as they start to sort of shape the vision for the leadership roles that they will eventually, and you will eventually settle into, whether it's at your current agency or at the next agency. So today isn't about me, it's about you, but just really quick about me. So the year was 2004. And for those of you too young to remember, before there was a Droga 5 or an Anomaly or Gut or Translation or David Miami, there was Crispin Porter Bogusky. The agency is now basically out of business, but in the early and mid 2000s and late 90s, there was Crispin Porter Bogusky and Wyden Kennedy and everybody else. So the man on the cover of this magazine is Alex Bogusky. And again, for those of you who are too young to remember, this man was sort of the embodiment of cool. He was called the sort of Steve Jobs of advertising. And this was my first boss. And I started at Crispin as an intern, and I got hired there. And I felt immediately home, and the work was incredibly disruptive. And a lot of the techniques I learned about creativity and my own creative taste and the ways that I want work to land in culture, I learned from there, as did a lot of my colleagues who've gone on to be CCOs at agencies, including my old partner, Tiffany Rolfe at RGA. I think a lot of us are still using these techniques that we learned from Alex. For me, I was going to be a lawyer. As the child of immigrants, I grew up believing that either you grow up to be a doctor or a lawyer or a loser. And I couldn't be a doctor. And so lawyer seemed fine. And then I kind of discovered this industry later. And I thought that fulfillment and creativity were things that you did at night after you got home from a job that you hated. And so I fell in love with this industry because no 2 days are the same, and because you get to use creativity to solve problems and you get to work with creative people. I was the youngest creative director in the history of this company, and I like saying that because it sounds cool, but here's what actually happened is in 2008 at Crispin, there was this kind of exodus of 5 really prominent creative directors. They went to go start their own company. And so through a mix of luck and timing, I was promoted to a job that I wasn't totally ready for, which was creative director on Volkswagen. And it was tricky for me because people who had remembered me as an intern some of them were now reporting to me. And I was really sensitive to the risk of sort of misplaying this kind of awkward dynamic and losing credibility. So that was one of the many challenges to navigate. As I look back, I was promoted for three reasons. I think one is, I wasn't a college athlete, but growing up, I was an athlete, and I was a basketball and baseball player. And I think as a former athlete and having an athlete's mentality, I know what it is to be part of a team. I love being part of a team. I love the dynamic of people coming together with different skills and being additive in different ways. And the sum of those parts adding up to something, to adding up to a greater whole. And so that team dynamic, I immediately sort of identified at an agency. Number two was, I was a sort of lifelong ham and class clown and center of attention. And so I liked the presentation component of advertising. I liked this idea that everything kind of built up to this presentation with clients. And could you get them excited about an idea? Could you build consensus around an idea? And I liked just the sweaty palm sort of adrenaline rush of presentations. And number three was, and I didn't realize this until it took me a little while when I was at Crispin. It was in Miami, and then I started there when it was in Boulder. And it was a very sort of bro culture, and this man with the leather wristbands and these guys over here to the left, I think they give you a pretty good sense of. It was a lot of sort of mountain biking and like extreme sports. It was just a lot of like personal interests that weren't me, and so I was trying to do sort of a shitty impression of the people whose work I admired, and it wasn't going great for me. And then eventually, I said, I'm the only one here who's the child of Iranian immigrants. I'm the only one here who's truly like a child of hip hop, and a child of stand-up comedy, and so my personal interests that kind of shaped my taste were quite different than a lot of the people who were there. And in fact, when I leaned into that, I started to find that, my contributions in client meetings were a little different than everyone else's, and my contributions in brainstorms were a little different than everybody else. And there was a value in that. And so, those were my gifts. And you're here because you have gifts. And when we're kids, no one aspires to work in advertising for the most part. We aspire to be pro athletes or movie stars or astronauts, right? But then we get a little bit older and we realize, again, maybe it was never about being the pro athlete. Maybe what we were attracted to was being part of a team. And maybe it wasn't about being a movie star. Maybe the thing that's at the core of that is we like to perform. And maybe the astronaut thing, maybe it's not about, landing on the moon. Maybe it's just like it's about ambition and accomplishments. You start to unpack why you had the dreams that you had as a kid and what that says about your gifts. And when I talk about that, gifts are not about Photoshop adeptness or your ability to write body copy for e-commerce. It's the question is, what's your ability, your passion, your obsession that predates your career in advertising, that you tap into through advertising. And this is a subject that really fascinates me. I'm going to probably offend some people here when I ask people what they studied in college, like it bums me out when people tell me they studied marketing, because actually I feel like when you study political science or English or Greek mythology or psychology or engineering, it is those things that you were studying that you didn't quite know what to do with that sort of shapes you and makes you the only you when you arrive at an agency. It doesn't mean that people don't have awesome careers studying advertising. And it also doesn't mean that just because you studied or majored in marketing that you don't have those other interests. But you're here because you have gifts, and I think knowing what your gifts are incredibly important. And that's for a number of reasons, but one is because different gifts make different creative directors, and what makes a great doctor or lawyer or, anything makes a great creative director, which is to say it's never one thing, right? We talk about doctors, but a brain surgeon's way different than a plastic surgeon, and a trial lawyer is way different than a environmental law specialist. And that's to say nothing of the fact that titles mean way different things at different agencies. When I was at Crispin Porter, Alex Bogusky, who was on the cover of, Fast Company, he was the ECD. And then when I was chief creative officer at Momentum, which is part of McCann, I would be on calls where it's like, I'm the chief creative officer of Momentum, and we're going to have the global chief creative officer of McCann, and then the North American chief creative officer team, and then we're going to have the New York chief creative. It's like, who the fuck? Like, okay, like So these titles mean different things depending on the company that you're at, and so that's important to remember. So life happens in chapters. I think you guys are all sort of old enough to sort of start to grasp that truth by now. And I think never forget the people you work for are people who once were in your spot. And so when we say life happens in chapters, I don't want to speak for everybody, because everybody has different experiences of what their 20s and what their 30s are like. But as you sort of think about your chapters in those kind of clean cut decade terms of like, what are your 20s and how are you going to spend your 30s? How are you going to spend your 40s? For me, and maybe some of you can relate to this, like, you saw the cover when Crispin was Agency of the Year. We were proud of the fact that we were a sweatshop. You couldn't put that. That would not be a very popular cover in 2022, as we have more respect for people's time and free time and mental health. But there was a previous generation of advertising that sort of glorified overworking, and I was overworked. And I'll tell you that I loved it, because I was ambitious and I was in my mid to late 20s, and I didn't have a lot going on in my life. And I liked to work nights and I liked to work weekends, because I felt like it was a privilege to have found this industry and not be a lawyer. And I felt like someone was going to come and stand in my doorway and be like, all right, motherfucker, the jig is up. You got to go be a lawyer now. To which I would have said, thank you for letting me do this as long as I got to. I'm from a small town in Arizona, and like the idea of just early on, the idea of making commercials that would air during primetime television, like that was a huge thrill for me. And I try not to forget that feeling. And so when I say life happens in chapters, and when I say never forget the people you work for now, they were once in your spot, and maybe they had no families, and maybe they worked maniacally and and they're now probably in a different chapter of their lives where they want to be more locked into family. They want to be, they don't find it as glamorous anymore to be in hotels all the time or on shoots in a way that maybe younger, hungrier creatives or less experienced creatives would find that incredibly appealing. And so I worked at CAA for a couple of years. Like, I used to fly from LA to Detroit. And what I realized the power of that was like, what I represented to my boss was a dozen flights to Detroit a year that he didn't have to take. And so that was incredibly additive to him. And so, when we talk about making more money, having more influence and control, having more client interaction, that promotion really starts with, how are you additive to your boss in a way that maybe removes his or her burden or lessens his or her burden? That is sort of a very sort of accelerated pathway, to achieving that title. I think when we start out, we're ambitious, and then we get on LinkedIn, especially now, and it's, no matter how well you're doing, someone's doing better, and comparison is the thief of joy. And so, no one goes on LinkedIn to talk about how they've been passed over for a raise or how they're struggling. Everyone's just doing so awesome, right? And so we compare ourselves to others, and so I think a lot of us, especially in this LinkedIn age, it feels like whatever we have is not enough. And I think with young creatives, especially who haven't kind of fully realized their talent, and I don't just mean creative talent, I mean all the talent that goes into getting promoted, separate and apart from creative, of which there's a number, of qualities that you have to develop. We want it because we want it. We want it because the world says that we're not enough. We want it because we want to tell our parents or our friends that we got this promotion. We want to share with the world that we got this promotion. It reminds me of Heath Ledger's Joker in Batman. He said something. He says he's like, I'm a dog chasing a car. I wouldn't even know what to do if I got it. And I've had times in my life where when I was a young creative, I wanted to be a creative director just because I wanted to be a creative director. I didn't really know why I wanted it. I wanted it because it's fun to announce that you've been promoted. Press release day is fun. But I didn't actually know what the job was. And I think sometimes throughout my career, I've had conversations with younger or less experienced creatives who remind me of me, and they want it because they want it. When we are ready, let me put it this way. When we're not ready, we think we want it for money and for power and for validation. When we are ready, it's because we've begun to sort of scrape the surface of how our gifts can be applied to creativity, to management, to presentations, to client relationships, to productions, to culture building, to all the facets that add up to the job of a creative director in totality. This is what you're up against. People only let you do what they've seen you do. There's a really funny thing, if you guys have ever made like a really any type of ad at your agency, but I always like to use the example of a car ad. So we're going to make this car ad. My first creative director job was on Volkswagen. And you kind of always start with this ambition of like, well, we want to make a car ad that's unlike any car ad that's ever existed before. We want it to look different, feel different, just totally fresh. And then the next question we ask ourselves is, okay, so, well, obviously we got to get a director who's directed a car commercial. We do that because we want to indemnify ourselves from the risk of a disastrous shoot from a guy who doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. But in doing that, in indemnifying ourselves from the risk, we're essentially we're lopping off a huge portion of the available talent pool that might be able to bring something new to a car commercial just by virtue of the fact that they've never made one before. And so what's true of directors is true at agencies too. When I got the job as chief creative officer at Momentum, which is an experiential agency, like it was such a leap of faith for the CEO who hired me. And what I had realized interviewing for various CCO jobs was, and this will be true for you in any promoted role, if it's within your agency or especially, at other agencies, is like people would rather hire a CCO that had burned his or her previous agency to the fucking ground than hire someone who's never done the job before. Because at least that CEO who hires him or her can say, well, like at least they've done the job, and on the creative director level, there are agencies that will always sort of see you as that junior, as that kid. And not all of them. I think good agencies are able to see the potential in you. Even the coolest places to work at are places that can see the potential in you before you can even totally see it in yourself, and promote you before you're even comfortable or even thinking about a promotion. That's the best way. But that's those places are hard to find. More often than not, the place that hired you as a junior might struggle sometimes to see you to see you anew. And so some of you will have to leave to be seen anew. Thanks to LinkedIn, there's more celebration when you get promoted now. But I think in general, one thing that dawned on me was like, up until there's like a chief role, there's usually, when you get promoted, there's not really an ice cream cake or balloons or anything. Usually the way it actually happens is you start doing the job. In some ways, you don't even realize that you're doing the job. There's a void in leadership, or there's a necessity for someone to step up, or there's a vacuum, or someone leaves, or someone gets sick, or there's just not enough people. There's not enough leadership because people are spread so thin. And so you start to step up, and you start to sort of fill these gaps because you have to survive the project or to get something over a finish line. And then 6 months or a year goes by, and you look up, and you're so undeniable that they finally have to sort of call you what you already are. And I actually think this is the best way to get promoted into that creative director role, because now it doesn't feel like you're ending one life and starting a new life. It feels like, all right, like day one of your sort of official start as a creative director is like, just keep doing what the fuck you've been doing for 6 months, because you've been doing the job. What that doesn't mean is like, start bossing people around. I think what it means is start applying your gifts more fully. And you hear me keep coming back to this notion of gifts. And you have to know what they are before you can apply them more fully. And you have to know how they make you the only you in your group before you can apply them more generously. And part of your applying your gifts requires you to be in the right environment where your gifts are appreciated. And again, at some agencies, it's such a perfect fit. There's so many agencies that, and there's so many types of agencies that if you're at an agency where your gifts are underappreciated, it doesn't make it a bad agency. It might just make it the wrong agency for you, and I think we've seen that a lot. I'm sharing this with you because you can start to sort of visualize in advance what kind of creative director you wish you can be based on the gifts that you bring to the table. And until you get there, just to have a deeper understanding and empathy for those you currently report to, not out of the kindness of your heart, but so that you can more effectively add value through your gifts, which is really how you accelerate your path to promotion. So here's some thoughts on those were some thoughts on sort of how to accelerate that path and some things to think about as you think about how to sort of actualize that ambition. And then I think here are some things that you're going to be confronted with, when you achieve that promotion, and better to think about them now than to wait until the promotion happens. Liking the job doesn't mean liking every part of the job. So I mentioned to you, or I can't remember if I mentioned to you, but my dream job when I was a kid, I wanted to play in the NBA. I wanted to be the power forward for the Lakers. And then I realized, I wasn't tall enough and my feet were too flat, and I did not have, those were not my gifts. And then you start to think about, well, like every player in the NBA, their dream job was to be in the NBA for the most part. But what does the life of the NBA look like? Like, it's really fun. The games are fun, and the money is fun, and the adoration is fun. But, one thing we don't think about a lot is like, LeBron James loves his kids as much as you love your kids, as much as I love my kids. It's not easy to be away from your kids 4 months out of the year. Like we assume that because you're a professional athlete, it must be easier for you to be away from your kids for, 42 road trips a year. That's actually really hard for people. Also, we don't see the work that happens at 5 o'clock in the morning that, everyone loves the last second shot, but to be ready for that moment is a lot of work that no one will ever see, and a lot of grind and a lot of sweat. And by the way, how about all the injuries, and how about all like getting your ankles taped and the boring stuff? Like, the point is, even the thing that you think is your ultimate dream job, it has these components to it that are incredibly grueling and monotonous and boring and annoying. And that's for any job. And so I think, to me, a dream job isn't loving every part of the job. A dream job is the parts you love so much that it makes it worth it to endure the parts that you don't love. For me, there's a lot of parts about advertising that I don't love, but what I do love is the adrenaline of a presentation. That when we're at our best, we're the best part of our client's day. I love hiring people who are better than their books. I love betting on people and being right about them. I love fantasy football. And what I love about fantasy football is I love making trades. I love deal making. I like the dopamine hit of deal making. And I find deal making, especially now as an entrepreneur who started my own agency. I love those things enough to endure boring spreadsheet conversations with my CFO, or conversations about HR, about, two employees who are embroiled in a sort of, passive aggressive battle of microaggressions. The review process at holding companies. Like, I don't love that. Firing people, that's the worst. If you ever have to do that, it's one of the worst things you'll ever have to do. If you write nothing else down today, please write this. They don't work for you, you work for them. All the best creative directors in the world, in my opinion, embrace this one principle. All the worst creative directors in the world never grasp this one principle. You want to be a great creative director, you currently probably have an art director or copywriter partner. To me, the best creative directors, actually what the job is maybe you're working with one partner now. The job of the creative director is to be everybody's partner. How do you make the idea better? If the idea is good, how do you make the idea better? If the idea is great, how do you make the idea a Gold Lion winner? If the idea is bad, how do you talk about the idea in a way that, rather than it being disparaging, as you talk about the qualities of why it's not working or it's bad, maybe you open a new door. Sometimes when an idea is bad, you start to talk about it and you start to realize, like, actually the opposite of this idea would be a really good idea. And so that's the job of the creative director, is to be everybody's partner. And another thing that I think we struggle with as creative directors is, as copywriters and art directors, we love to have the idea. Our idea is in the deck. Our idea got sold. We get to make our idea. And as a creative director, you still have ideas. So sometimes it's can you have the idea and give it away? Let a team that maybe they're still building that creative concepting muscle, but they have a lot of want to, and they have a lot of passion, and they're giving a lot of emotional investment. Give them the gift of a half-baked idea and let them run with it and let them take credit for it. And that is a shift, I think, that the best creative directors understand. And I think that that's a segue into this notion of give the thing that you're needing. The creative direction I always hated was, hey, keep going, or hey, just have fun with it. I think these two comments, keep going and have fun with it, it feels like a very sort of pompous and outdated version of creative direction. It's like, that's the fucking best you can give me, is keep going and have fun with it. You know, my first boss, Andrew Keller, a real mentor of mine. He's currently at Facebook Meta, but he was the kind of the second command under Alex at Crispin Porter. He did the opposite of that. What he did that was really powerful was he would read all your ideas out loud, you know, and now it's like this busy person, and he's reading all your ideas out loud, and he's making it sort of fun and interactive. And when someone reads your ideas out loud, it makes you write your ideas differently, because it's like, oh, you're not just going to gloss over this. And so, but the thing that he did was, when I walked out of his office, I always knew what to do next. And as a junior, I think that is the ultimate gift. You know, it's like, I don't need to know the next 20 steps, especially if I've never really produced anything, but I need to walk out of this office and know what the next thing to do is. You know, rewrite this thing and this thing and this thing. Hey, that other thing led to a new idea. I'm going to write that. I'm going to figure out how to write that. This thing, it's a really good idea, but it needs a hook. And like, so I know what to do next. And I trust that even though I don't know the next dozen steps, the person who I've entrusted with my career, they will guide me step by step. For everything you don't know yet about being a creative director on day one or year one, you can make up for by remembering the imprint left by your best and worst experiences with the creative directors who managed you. You know, how did they work for you? How did they make your idea better? How did they sell your idea? How did they fight for your voice to be heard? How did they open doors for your gifts to be shared? What did they give you that you were needing? And now that you're a creative director, you want more credit? Give credit. You want more validation? Give validation. You want more chances? Give chances. This is a picture taken in 1974. The man on the right, camera right, is my father. He owned a country western bar in Tucson. Though he's the world's only known Iranian cowboy, I like to say. The man on the left, every person on this Zoom knows. That is a pre-beard, sort of chubby disco era Willie Nelson. So I love to share this picture with people because, you know, it's just a cool artifact of my life. But I share this with you. I share a picture of my dad because I think, like management styles, parenting styles evolve with culture. My dad's from a small town in Iran. And so my grandfather, my dad's dad, his parenting style was, life is hard and we don't have a lot of money, and we don't have a lot of opportunity. So whatever you have to do to gain opportunity, to gain education, to gain upward mobility, his style was, do what you got to do. The evolution of that, my dad's parenting style was, don't do what I do what I tell you to do. You know, so like my dad ate like a pig, but when I ate like a pig, he'd act like, you know, dude, like, you know, put your fork down and chew like a gentleman. And I was like, dude, you don't fucking chew like a gentleman. It's like, well, don't do what I do what I tell you to do, which was the best that he could do. But I struggled with that. And so now I have 3 young kids, and I think about what kind of father I want to be. And I go to the wisdom of Brené Brown. And Brené Brown talks about, in parenting, you have to become the person that you want your kids to be. I want my kids to be more empathetic, more self-aware, more curious. That means I have to model that behavior for them. The problem with this, compared to the way my dad did it, is this is way fucking harder and requires way more work and self-reflection on my part. I expect my kids to read more and watch less screens, even as they get a front row seat for my phone addiction, right? So to instill the values I wish for my children to embrace, I have to first live those values myself. And that requires work and change on my part. So I think what's true of parenting is true for management and creative direction. You want to work with bold, thoughtful, relentless, honest creatives. start by asking yourself, what changes must you make in your own life to be more bold, thoughtful, relentless, honest, creative? And to reiterate, this approach is way fucking harder, but it's also way more gratifying and it's way more enduring. This is another one that I think is really important as you stick around in this industry and you start to get promoted and you start to take on more responsibility, especially if you're at a holding company, where the titles can get quite regal and there's a lot of layers of management. There's a lot of layers of leadership. I think at Dunkin' Donuts, the product is donuts. And at Apple, the product is phones and tablets and watches. And at creative agencies, the product is ideas. And you're the product person. And I love being a product person. And so my advice to you is, as you progress through the industry, do not be seduced into thinking that the more promotions you get, the further away you get from the product. Do not become too good to rewrite slides or redo a comp. Never lose the ability to be both a general and a soldier. You guys remember the opening of the movie Gladiator? It's like, Maximus is on the front of the line and cowardly Joaquin Phoenix is in the back of the line. Like, be Maximus, be the general who is on the front line. At my agency, we're a 20-person agency. I write slides, I concept ideas, not because I have to. We have awesome creatives and, they bring a lot of stimulus, but I do it because I know the best way to lose my fastball is to stop throwing it. And that's critical because creativity is an infinite and compounding resource. The more you use, the more you have. That's the sort of mystical quality that makes creativity, that makes creativity in our business an unfair business advantage for companies. The industry will try to sort of convince you aspects of the product development is beneath you eventually. But guess what? When the work sucks, guess who they're going to point to? They're not going to point to the account manager or the strategist. They're going to point to the creative. And so I take great lessons from, a mentor of mine, Rob Riley, who was my boss at Crispin. He's now the global creative chairman of WPP. You could argue global creative chairman of WPP is the most senior creative title you can have in our entire industry on the planet. Right now at 11:41 Eastern, right now, my man Rob is probably looking at a deck. David Droga, who I've gotten to know a little bit, CEO of Accenture, I would ask friends at Droga 5, I'd be like, man, this guy's worth several $100 million. Like, does he still come to work? They're like, Omid, not only does he still come to work, but as you're texting me right now, homeboy is outside my office looking at a deck. He's not doing this because he needs to make a couple extra bucks. These guys are doing this because they got into this because they love being product people, and being product people is what fulfills them. Less than 1% of our jobs is press release day, when you get to tell everyone how awesome your work is. Those days are fucking awesome, by the way, but it's 1%. It's less than 1%. 99% of what we do is a grueling process of crawling over glass on your knees and elbows, doing work that no one will ever see. So you have to find out how to love the process and never stop being a product person. There are so many, again, as we think about what is the job of the creative director and how to be an effective creative director and how to step into that role on day one. I think being in the excuse removal business is, again, one of the most important things that you can do. By the way, not just as a creative director, but in any role that you're currently in. There are so many reasons why an idea should die. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. The client said that, the client said this. To say nothing of, by the way, just the internal gauntlet just to get to a client if you happen to work at one of the larger agencies where you have 5 different people called chief creative officer and 4 different chief strategy officers. And so there's just there's such a thing in some of these agencies as too many smart people. And so it just takes so much endurance just to navigate the internal process. Your job on behalf of everyone, and it's so hard, is to not lose enthusiasm for ideas you believe in and to navigate them through what Lee Clow once called the idiot forest. The idiot forest is a very great metaphor. It doesn't mean that the people you work with are idiots. There's just a lot of devil's advocacy. And the other thing about ideas is ideas are like a carton of milk on a counter. It's like, You get that thing out and it's cold and it's ready to pour on cereal and it fucking tastes great. And the longer it sits out on the counter, it just starts to get warmer and it starts to smell bad. And so sometimes even you show an idea to a client, everyone's so excited. And then there's a couple week process of developing the idea and blah, blah, blah. And people lose enthusiasm for things. They forget what they felt like the first time they saw it. It's as if the idea already happened. And your job is like, dude, we never actually made this. The world never actually saw this. When the world sees this, they'll feel the same way about it that you did the first time you saw it 3 weeks ago. So it's not an easy thing to do, but maintaining that enthusiasm on behalf of everybody is an important part of the job. And I talk about the idiot forest and sort of protecting your idea in the idiot forest, but I'm going to add an addendum to Lee Clow's idiot forest metaphor, which is don't treat people like idiots. Again, when someone's trying to be a devil's advocate, or when someone's trying to poke holes in your idea, or when someone's trying to pressure test your idea, they are trying to be helpful, whether they are or not. But when us creatives treat people like idiots, yes, there's the cliche of the British planner who over-intellectualizes your idea into oblivion, and yes, there's the cliche of the idiot colleague without a creative bone in their body who's constantly playing devil's advocate because it's easier to say no than yes, and it's easier to say why an idea doesn't work than why it does. Those are true cliches for a reason. But when you when you treat people like idiots, now you're a cliche too. You're the cliche of the petulant, failed artist turned creative director who doesn't know how the big boy world works. And once you become that cliche, which is also a cliche for a reason, you've now dulled your gift and you've dulled, your impact and your effectiveness. And I think speaking of cliches, I think there's the other cliche is the cliche of the role of the creative director to point to things that other people have made and say, yes, I like this. No, I don't like that. Green light this, red light that. It's great to know the answer. It's even better to give away the answer and let others take ownership of it and take credit for it. But sometimes questions can be more powerful than answers. Questions, when you're in a leadership role, can quietly sort of transmit values more powerfully than a direct statement. So an example of this would be a question as simple as, what's your plan? When you ask an art director, copywriter team as a creative director, when you say, what's your plan, you're subconsciously transmitting two things. You're transmitting that you're responsible for having a plan, and there's a sense of the sense of responsibility in that. And you're also transmitting that you have authority to solve this problem or own a piece of this project. I've been a creative director since 2008. I'm still working on this. I'm giving you the advice, but I'm still working on this myself because, like a lot of you, like I get addicted to being right. It's like the thing that sometimes is our gift is also our detriment. I have strong conviction about ideas, and I'm incredibly decisive. And when I feel that hair on my arm stand up, or when I can see something clearly, it's hard to talk me out of it. So, and then when it actually comes to fruition and it's exactly as I envision, like there's an addiction to that feeling. But to be my best self and to unlock my gifts fully, I have to remember that if I have all the answers, the team is limited by the confines of my one imagination. Even if I have a great imagination, it's just one imagination. When I pose the question, I allow you the opportunity to solve it in a way that maybe I wouldn't have imagined on my own. And this is how I think the best creative teams become hive minds. This is how places like Wieden+Kennedy are so consistently strong, and how places like Droga 5 are so consistently strong is because it's not all hinging on the brilliance of one person. There's a hive mind. This notion of have to versus get to, I think, it's sort of easy in advertising to be cynical and you sort of know the ways that it's easy to be cynical, whether it's like, I sell things, or like, there's too much compromise, so negativity is infectious. And positivity can also be infectious. When someone is authentically positive, it doesn't feel like they're slanging some bullshit. But like when you actually feel real positivity from people, that's infectious too. when it's not manufactured. When I was at CPB, and it became the best agency in the world, and for a 4 or 5 year period, it wasn't on the strength of Super Bowl ads or huge big budget ads. It was actually on the strength of banners and micros, like the first generation of banners and microsites. Things meant to be sort of small and disposable and low budget that people with a certain kind of irrational optimism approached with an irrational ambition to be award-winning and culture moving. And so when your teams, I say this because, teams take cues from their managers in ways that's beyond their control, in the same way that you probably do with the creative director that you work for. And when your teams see your hopefulness and ambition in even something seemingly sort of inconsequential or doomed to be lame right from the brief, they can't help but join in that feeling, which is hard because maybe it's on the back of manufacturing that feeling a dozen other times to no avail, So you need to be that source of optimism that, yes, it's been hard, but maybe this time will be different. And instead of approaching the assignment as we have to do this, or we accept that this is going to be bad right from the start, or this is something that we just have to get out the door, all these things that we say right from the start to remove the pressure, but it also removes the ambition. Just this mindset of we get to. And again, I don't know where you're from and I don't know what you really wanted to do for a living, but I go back to my gratitude that I was going to be a lawyer, and I probably would have been a pretty okay lawyer, but I think I would have been just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're happy at it. And I had accepted at an early age that I was going to have a profession that I wasn't going to be happy in. And so I try to come back to my gratitude and think to myself, like, I get to do this. And I find that helpful. And I find that helpful because before your teams can care what you think, they have to think that you care, and it's hard to fake that. Another component of managing people that I want you to think about before you're actually managing people is this notion of equal treatment versus fair treatment. I don't believe in equal treatment. I believe in fair treatment. And I think fair is defined differently depending on different people. As you develop personal relationships with your team, you start to learn that different people respond to different stimuli. And some people respond to praise and compliments by working harder, and others respond by coasting and being complacent. I was someone who, when I was overly praised, I would get lazy. But that's not the truth for everybody. There's some who respond to sort of tough love by shutting down completely. And there's others who respond by going hard as fuck and doing the best work of their lives. So figuring out how to strike the balance, takes a level of feel that it's partly instinctual. It's partly something that you'll develop over time. It is one of those things that as you develop it over time, you're going to get it wrong sometimes. And when you get it wrong, you have to be gentle with yourself and you have to really learn from it because it's people's lives. I think this is one of the most important things that I can espouse to you, not just as a creative director, but in any facet of your career, is finding yourself in the failure. So I think there's two kinds of sort of agency cultures that I've experienced. I'll boil it down to two. There are places where people feed off each other, and there are places where people feed on each other. And when I say feed on each other, it's like where the second that things go wrong, it's all about pointing fingers and figuring out who's to blame and why it's not your fault. And every agency obviously experiences failure. Wyden Kennedy experiences failure. Gut experiences failure. Every agency loses clients. Every agency has bad presentations. Every agency misses the mark. Most of your ideas, as you know, as creatives, will never see the light of day. So sometimes this is your fault, and sometimes it's not your fault at all. Now, as a creative director, heed the wisdom of, there's an old coach of Alabama football. His name is Bear Bryant. And he said, find yourself in the failure. And what he meant by that was, okay, the quarterback just threw an interception. That's the quarterback's fault. It's easy to blame the quarterback for throwing the interception. He threw it, the ball was in his hand, he made the decision. But when we find ourselves in the failure, we don't stop there. We also say, okay, he threw the ball, but I called the play. Did I put him in the best position to succeed? Did I call a play that contributed to his failure? And why do we want to find ourselves in the failures? Because you heard me say, yeah, positivity and negativity can be infectious, but the best thing that you can make infectious at any company is accountability. It's incredibly liberating to be able to be openly accountable. There's a saying that goes, it's amazing what happens when no one cares who gets the credit. I think it's also amazing what happens when no one cares who takes the blame. And all of a sudden, when no one cares who takes the blame, everyone's playing loose and no one is scared. And I was just talking to Greg Hahn at Mischief, and like the whole premise of Mischief is, what would you do if you weren't scared? You know, fear of bad meetings, fear of letting our boss down, fear of saying the stupid thing, fear of insulting someone. These things have like an enormous impact on our creativity. And so our least scared selves is our most creative selves. And the biggest way you can sort of cultivate this culture of accountability around you is when you're right and the account director is wrong. When you have an idea and the account director tells you why it's wrong and then you present it and it's a fucking huge hit, resist the urge to rub his or her nose in it. Resist the urge to say, I told you so. Because next time when you get something wrong, maybe they'll grant you, the same courtesy. Maybe not, but maybe, so you have to be that change. You have to set that example. Many of us work our way up the ladder with a sort of chip on our shoulder. When I started at Momentum, I went out to coffee with all these people and all these different people, and they all told me that there's this one guy in my creative department who's this malcontent and who has a bad attitude. And we'll call him Sam. This guy Sam's got such a bad attitude, and Sam's so negative. And all these people in different departments all wanted to tell me how Sam has a bad attitude. And then I started to get to know Sam a little bit. And it's like, I know why Sam has a bad attitude. Sam has a bad attitude because he feels like he's not making the work that he wants to make here. And he feels like he's not being put in positions to succeed. And there's actually it's like all the people who told me what's wrong with Sam. It's like, I don't know if I have a problem with Sam. I think I have a fucking problem with you guys. And I think at every agency, there's a Sam. And Sam ended up being fast-tracked into a creative director role because he had so many gifts that were being stifled. And so there was a new system in place, and all of a sudden it felt like, he was able to express his talent. He was able to express his gifts. And so my point in that is that a lot of us have this chip on our shoulder, and we use sort of anxiety and insecurity to fuel our engines, especially as we're coming up. And we want to prove everybody wrong. And it can be really effective, actually. That chip on your shoulder, that defensiveness, it can be helpful. But over time, as we grow and we enjoy more success and we start to make some things and we start to put some campaigns into the world, I think some of us, we hang on to that feeling, that chip on our shoulder a little bit too long. We try to sort of bottle that feeling because we can feel it losing intensity because we're feeling less insecure as we start to find our way in the industry a little bit. But we mislead ourselves into thinking that the chip is the reason why you've gotten to where you're at. And it's actually not the case. You earned your position despite your chip, not because of it. And so the chip was cheap fuel, and look back on its existence with gratitude for that. But the premium fuel that brought you to this destination, it wasn't the chip, it was your gifts. This is something that weighs super heavily on me, is like, as you work your way into management positions, you're going to make small decisions that are going to totally change people's lives. When I got the job at Crispin, I was an intern, and I produced a couple of things as an intern. And so I went into Alex Bogusky's office. I was trying to get a meeting with him for a month, but he wasn't interested in taking a meeting with an intern. And so when it was time for me to go back to Miami ad school, I was like, I can't go back to school. I'm home here. I need to stay here. I kind of cornered this guy in his office, and I showed him the work that I had done. And I told him I would stock the fridges if he'd let me stay. And I told him I felt like I was home and I belonged here, and I won't let him down if he'll give me this opportunity that they don't normally give to interns who haven't finished ad school yet. And rather casually, he kind of liked what I was saying, and he liked the audacity of it. And he said, well, okay, let's give it a shot. For him, that's a relatively low risk decision. Certainly one of the lowest risk decisions he'll make that day. He's going to make 10,000 decisions as the head of a company in a day. So he makes a decision. It's a low risk decision, and it's one of 1,000. That's what it is for him. For me, This man with the utterance of a few simple words has completely changed the trajectory of my life forever. I'm now not going back to Miami. I'm not going back for my last 4 quarters of school. I'm here now. And so that moment completely changed my life. I don't know. I don't know what happens if that doesn't happen. And you'll be in positions to hire and to look past a mediocre book or to promote someone despite that proof that they can do the job to the exact specifications, and to give someone a chance. To give someone a chance is such a sacred thing, especially a junior where it's like, oh man, you worked at Havas for a year and you're making banners. Like, I don't know, how much can you really extrapolate from someone's book after a year? How much can you really extrapolate from someone's book after a year and a half in ad school? You know, and so it's such a sacred thing to go deeper than that, to go deeper than that and to give somebody a chance. And most, I think, you know, will look back on a decades-long career piled with awards and articles and all that cool stuff, and they'll actually realize that in a lot of ways, that's the most satisfying part looking back, is that effect that you have on people and the way that you can change the course of someone's life. All right, so you've heard me talk a lot about gifts today, gifts. You're here because you have gifts. And when we talk about gifts, it's gifts you were born with, gifts that shaped your childhood experience. When I talk about being part of a team, when I talk about being a ham and a class clown, about loving the adrenaline rush of presentations, like I don't know why I was this way. I didn't learn it. These are my gifts, and your gifts are art gifts, and your gifts are IQ gifts and EQ gifts and taste gifts and personality gifts and positivity gifts. Like it comes in so many forms, but whatever it is, these are gifts that you're born with, and these are gifts that kind of shaped your childhood experience and shaped your worldview, and they're gifts you inherited from your fucking ancestors, you know, and they're like written into genetic code, and they're flowing through your veins, and they're gifts that you've always been able to count on and lean on in your moments of greatest opportunity and greatest adversity. And they're gifts that are so endemic to your sense of identity, whether you call yourself an artist or whether you call yourself a performer or whether you call yourself a team member. These are gifts that are so endemic to your sense of identity going back to your childhood that it's actually easy to forget about them or take them for granted or undervalue them. Even though deep down, you can trace your greatest accomplishments, your highest fulfillments, probably to the fact that in those moments, what you were actually doing was you were honoring your gifts. And so when I so boldly and audaciously claim to share the meaning of life with you, I believe that the meaning of life is this. I believe it is to give back the gifts that you were given. To give back the gifts that you were given. When you do, you don't become the next Rob Riley or David Droga or Fernando Machado or Steve Stout or Anselmo Ramos or Colleen DeCourcy. What you become is the first ever you. And no one can be you as well as you can, which makes it the most noble aspiration of all. And it's the most noble aspiration of all as a creative director, as a parent, as a friend, as a spouse, as a member of the human race. And so that's what I have for you today. And with that, I thank you all for sharing with me the gift of your time. And I'm down to stick around for a couple questions if anyone has any. Asaki, okay.
There we go.
Amazing name. What's up, man?
I have a question. What kind of advice would you give in terms of navigating politics inside an agency? You know, I don't know anything about that. I don't even know, did you read any books or did you just suffer and learn from it?
I think the coolest thing I'm assuming everybody on this call is, I don't know if I should assume everybody on this call is on the creative side. Is that a fair assumption, LIA team, or is it from all walks?
It's mostly from the creative side, some from the tech side, strategy, design.
I think all of that is grouped into the same thing, which is I think everyone here are product people. So I sort of think about an agency as there's product people, and then there's support people, and support people are important too. We talk about politics a lot and at network agencies, and I don't. It's hard to give advice on it because it's hard to define it. It comes in different forms. I think if you're at a place that's overly political in a way that you have an allergic reaction to, it's not about reading a book on how to navigate it. It probably means you're at the wrong place. I think the people who have sort of realized their gifts best as creative directors and beyond, they seem to have a common thread that they're kind of above politics and they're able to focus on product. Man, at the end of the day, we talk about culture, like agency culture. You want to know what's great culture is really great work. Like work that wins awards and work that the press writes about. When that's happening, it's amazing how the high fives are flowing, and how much we like love dogs at the office when the work is good. When the work is bad and you're losing and a dog barks on a call, it's like, shut that fucking dog up. So like, to me, culture is bigger than politics and culture is work. Culture is the quality of the work. If you feel like politics is impeding your ability to make work that is up to the standard that you set for yourself, I don't think it's about navigating politics. I think it's about finding something that's a better fit for you. I think it's product. The best product people seem to have a way of being above it. When the work is good, it's amazing how some of this stuff melts away. Angelo.
Thanks, Omid. And thanks for the talk. I'm trying to get my MBA through your podcast as well. So that's really appreciate all your interviews there. I have a question about navigating, the kind of, the question we all ask, work-life balance. And, we all kind of hear that you go for a grind a little bit and then it gets better. But in some cases, I think as CDs, your role kind of evolved because now you're not just managing people. You might also be a working CD. So you're taking care of your own stuff. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts on how does one navigate that? Or is that just kind of like depending on your own decisions on the chapter of your life and where you want to take it?
Yeah, I think there was a previous generation that really glamorized overworking. And I think about, again, I talk about this kind of sweatshop mentality at Crispin and how I was there all night and all weekend. And on the one hand, I think to myself, I had a 10-year career in 5 years, but it wasn't because I was so awesome. It was because when you work nights and weekends, you work 10 years in 5 years. So it's, on the one hand, it's a way to accelerate your career, if you're enjoying the work enough to want to go above and beyond to that extent. On the other hand, if I'm being really honest, why was I there all night and all weekend? I had a really shitty apartment. There was like snacks there. I fucked off a lot at work. I'd be there late and then I'd get there late. My brain wouldn't really turn on until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd work until 10 o'clock. I'd complain about how I was there until 10 o'clock. I'd wake up, my brain wasn't working. And so my next job was at CAA and that was way more adult hours. It was like a 9 to 5 job. And I was like, it's actually the same amount of hours. And especially as you start to progress, your brain gets so much more efficient. And so the transition from starting out into these more managerial roles is you just get to good ideas faster. You know when to trust your instincts. You're way more efficient. You can work smarter in place of working harder. I will also say the other thing from a previous generation to this generation, like the poor studio people at Crispin and at Wyden and all these sort of agencies before 10 years ago, it's like you give them direction. They'd stay up all night. They wouldn't sleep. And then they'd show something bleary-eyed at 9 o'clock in the morning. And you would just pray it was right. And if it wasn't right, it means your whole night was a complete fucking waste of time and you have to start over. And I feel like these shared tools that we have, the ability to go into decks in progress and course correct and to write things right there and to not have to put everything on a wall and mark it up and send it back and put it back on the wall. To be able to, these collaborative tools are no small thing. It's all my way of saying, I think when you combine that with a sort of renewed focus on mental health and work life, I think the word is integration, not balance. I have 3 kids. When I'm with my kids, sometimes I am thinking about work. Sometimes I'm in a childlike state with my kids where it unlocks something in my head that I have to go write down for work. A lot of time, I'm talking to you guys right now, I got to go pick up my family from the airport momentarily. I'm thinking about, so this notion that we sort of separate these things out, I think is unrealistic, especially now that most of us are working from home so much. I'll whittle it all down to, I think you have to decide what your priorities are. The guy I brought up, Rob Riley, he has the job that he has because he sacrificed a lot when it came to family. He didn't really want a family. His family is his work. He's given everything to his work because he loves it so much that's what he's dedicated his whole self to. And that's why he has the biggest job. But we don't all need to have the biggest job. I don't think that's the goal, is to have the biggest job for most of us. I think for me, like if I'm feeling fulfilled and I'm working with people I enjoy and I'm making things that I'm proud of, and I feel like I'm being a good father to my kids and a good husband to my wife. And if I'm checking those are my priority buckets, then I'm just constantly revisiting those priorities. That's what's important for me. For others, it's all about work. For others, it's all about family. Like, I know guys who are in their 50s, they're still freelancing. They don't want to feel like part of a team. They don't want to feel like part of an agency. They really want to have an exchange of ideas for money, and they want to have a separation from it. And the second they click the Zoom off or leave the meeting, they want to have no attachments. So I think it really is about, like, you only get this one life, and you have to decide what's important to you, and you have to keep checking back in on that, and then you have to keep adjusting your circumstances to fit your priorities. Isabella, excuse me.
I think Amos was first.
Oh, okay.
So he wants to go.
Hi. Hey, Omid. Thanks for the really inspiring chat. I really learned a lot from your sharing. Earlier, you mentioned a little bit about if you're at an agency for a really long time, if you've been here from the start in the same role, and then it could be difficult for the agency to see you differently than to the role that you are in right now versus where you want to grow into. And you said that probably the best way to move on is to leave. And I was thinking if you have any advice on how to navigate a situation like that, not necessarily about leaving, or is there a way that, you can do something to get your agency to notice you differently? Or what would your advice be on if someone was in a situation like that?
It's not necessarily the best way. It's just some of what I wanted to do in this talk is say some of the quiet things out loud. And it's something that I've noticed, is something I've been guilty of, is you see people in a certain way and in a certain light. And sometimes people want to keep you in that. And I even think, especially in sort of those larger holding company structures, they're sort of incentivized to keep you where you're at, because they start to over promote and you have all these titles that don't mean anything. And so there's almost like an incentive or a benefit to keeping people where they're at, even if they're a little bit overqualified. It's a shitty reality, but it is the truth. So it's not like that everywhere. But I think probably my advice is the same advice you give to somebody who's going to buy a car, which is like, your only leverage is your willingness to walk away. If you're someplace that you love and you want to be there, but you believe that you're being undervalued, or you believe that you're deserving of greater responsibility, you got to find the person who you can have that conversation with. Don't have that conversation until you're prepared to walk away. Because if you're not prepared to walk away, you're not maximizing your leverage in that conversation. And by the way, and when I say that, it's, you have to be willing to accept, the outcome that you want is them saying, like, man, Amos is the man. And like, dude, this guy, we got to promote him. We're going to fucking lose him. Like, we got to pay him $25,000 more and got to give him you hope that that's going to happen. Or they might tell you, like, listen, man, we just, for any variety of reasons, financial or whatever the case may be, or they may not even tell you the real reason. Like, we're not promoting right now, but if they value you, but they can't promote you, they're probably going to talk about, if it's a bigger place, they're probably going to set some thresholds for what you need to do to achieve it. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of times we sort of internalize these things and we hope we get noticed. And sometimes we do, and it's great. But other times I think it's very tough for a lot of us. And I think the women in our industry in particular have suffered from this, is just advocating for ourselves and knowing our value and being able to ask for what we want, because creative people are pleasers, and creative people a lot of times don't love business confrontation. Yeah. I don't know why that's true, but I've just observed that to be the case. Like, we'd rather write it in an email than talk about it, because we can, we don't have to look anybody in the eye. But that's an important skill to develop, because guess what? Once you're a creative director, someone's going to come to you and they're going to have the conversation with you that sounds like you need to have with your creative director. And so understanding the dynamics of both sides of that conversation is helpful, especially the first time I was having conversations with creatives who were asking for raises or asking for promotions. All I had to lean on was I would even say to them, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say sitting here, but I do know what it feels like to be sitting where you're sitting. And at least that's some level of understanding that starts to hopefully advance the conversation in a meaningful way. Okay, Isabella.
Hey, sorry, I'm off camera because it's very early on the West Coast. But But so yeah, thank you so much. Your perspective here is awesome. I think like that, what you said about like be the first ever you is going to stick with me for life. So I'm glad Angela asked that question about work-life balance, because when you mentioned before about like, oh, everyone has to hustle to like get where they are, and then you kind of like backtracked it. It's kind of glamorized. So I have a follow-up to that one, and then I have another question after that. Like I work very well between the 9 to 5, and I hustle hard during that time, and to the point where I'm like, I don't have anything left after that time. I've given you my all. I want to get to my life after this. I'm not wasting time at work, and I'm giving you everything, and they want more from me. So like, how do you show them like, I work faster and better than everyone here. You got what you pay me for out of me. Like, how do I show you that? And how do I prove to you that so that you don't push me even harder to the point of burnout?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, the definition of integrity is the matching up of words and actions. I feel like the integrity we have to have as creatives is to do what we say we're going to do. If we say we're going to have the ideas to you by noon, we're going to have the ideas to you by noon, and they're going to be inspired ideas, and there's going to be a bunch of them. And then like, and that should be rewarded with like, man, working with Isabel is the shit. She fucking does what she says. She comes, she brings energy to this. It's, you know, and then I think, yeah, sometimes it's like, man, Isabel is the shit, and she does what she says. Her reward for that is like
more work.
we should sort of, you know. I also think, just going back to the kind of work-life balance thing, like, I think for a lot of us, especially when we're ambitious, it's like water fills the size of the container that you pour it into. So you have like, I love when a client comes to us and they're like, we need ideas in 2 days. I feel like the quality of the ideas in 2 days is not going to be that different than the quality of the ideas in a month. Yeah. You know, the way we present it or comp it up might be different. And in fact, that's better because it's raw, but we're going to sort of fill the time. But I really like what you're saying. I'm sorry that's happening to you at the agency that you're at, but I've sort of seen a relatively promising shift overall in our industry, that like professional hours are a little bit more respected, and the phone does not feel like it's, you know, basically these handcuffs that are this like ankle monitoring bracelet, you know, wrapped around your leg that means we own your ass, you know, all day and all night. And I think there probably is, if you're doing what you said you're going to do, then I think there's probably, it sounds like, you know, if you're delivering in the way that you say, then I think there's probably some boundary setting that you need to have, not with everybody, but with one person there in a leadership role who you trust. The reason I say that is because sometimes people are doing this, and they're not doing this to burn you out or drive you into the ground. They're doing this because people are wired a certain way, and they're just trying to generate this output, and they kind of lack sense, you know, they lack a sensitivity about people's personal time or how they may feel about additional asks. So they might just be misreading you, you know, and I think it's just, the reason I say have the conversation, that's probably advice I wouldn't have given 10 years ago, but I think we're in a time now where there's a greater respect for mental health. There's a greater respect for balance. And so if you can sort of, just as we talked about, when it's about money and promotions, it's about asking for what you need. And if what you need is that separation starting at 5, if you're working, sometimes it's as stupid as like the people you're working with keep different hours than you. So they're responsive in the evenings because the evenings is when they're good. And you feel this pressure to reply right away. So I think probably my best advice to you is find someone in management that you trust and try to have an open conversation about it. And when you do, you know, point to the fact that you are holding up your end of the bargain. That's sort of the most important part.
Yeah. And I do have a separate question. Hopefully it's quick, maybe. So I think like the scariest part for me becoming a creative director is the giving feedback part. I want to be a yes and person all the time. But there's some people that like clearly didn't read the brief, or like are just like totally missing the mark. And it's just, or like, this has been done 100 times before. And like, I don't know how you be a yes and person when you're just like, oh, I hate this and I want to say no.
Yeah. I think it's a great thought. You know, what I love, especially for more junior creatives, is like, I love volume. Even if something's just sort of like complete, like just bring a bunch, what you sort of lack in experience, just bring in volume, because I think once you're more seasoned in this industry, just like the dumbest little things can can be the impetus for actually like an idea of a valid idea. There's if you read the book about Jim Henson, there's great inspiration in that like when they would discuss ideas, he would just only talk about the things that he wanted to move forward with. Sometimes you're in a client presentation and you show 3 things and they spend all this time on what they don't like about 2 ideas. And when they do that, I just think to myself, like, I don't fucking care what you don't like. Let's just talk about the one. We're just trying to make one thing here. We brought you 3, but I think that's true for creative directors too. It's like you read an idea and it doesn't work. You don't owe it to explain why every single thing doesn't work. What you owe is to find a couple things that you can build upon, that you can give instruction for what to do next on, that you can show some enthusiasm around. And then in the rare events where you can't find anything that you don't like,
keep going.
Well, I don't think it's keep going. It's if you've read 10 pages of ideas and you don't like anything, you owe me something more than keep going. You owe me, what is it that's in your head that makes that invalidates all of these? Start talking about that, because maybe this was a problem with the brief, or maybe it's just like, and so in doing that, you start to focus on like, what aren't we talking about that we need to be talking about? Or what aren't we focusing on that we need to be focusing on? And once you start to have that conversation, an idea might spark in that conversation. And then that idea belongs to the people who brought you the stuff that was wrong, that sparked the thing that was right. Like that's the coolest thing that I try to sort of espouse to younger creatives is like, dude, if everything that you wrote goes in the trash can, but it leads to a series of conversations that spawns these 2 or 3 sort of things that felt tangential to what you wrote, those are yours now. And like, take them and run with them. And in fact, your creative director probably has an ego and they're probably all excited that they've solved it. And they're like, you know what it is? It should be that. But it's like, yeah, dude, take that. If your creative director feels a certain level of ownership over it, that's a good thing for you, because he or she's probably going to be the one in the room selling it. Attach yourself to that, take ownership of it, put shape to it. And, I benefited from that a lot at Crispin. Like, dude, just the power of sitting with the creative director, bring a lot, and then just get conversations going.
Yeah.
And then like the things that you walk out of that room with, something's going to make it to that meeting. I fucking guarantee that. So some of that is like setting those ground rules with creatives early, because if you don't, sometimes it's just like, oh, he just kills everything. It's like, no, I'm not killing everything. Like, here's what we're actually trying to do.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you so much.
My question for you would be, I feel like this is a question that would get like different answers depending on who this is being asked to, but what do you think is the most important thing a creative director could aspire to represent to his or her team? Because during everything all the stories you were telling us, one thing that stuck to me was how at some point in your career, you represented to your CD 12 flights he didn't have to take. So sort of flipping that, what do you think a creative director should try to represent to his or her team? So should a creative director try to represent a safety net, a cannon for them to propel forward, a never-ending source of ambition, like you name it? What do you think would be the best?
Yeah, I think it was in there. I think to me, it's as simple as the most important thing that a creative director could represent is, you don't work for me, I work for you. And I say that because, again, you can all sympathize with the people who now report to you because you were that person. And you can all sympathize with the fact that they're wanting what you were wanting. They want to make work that wins awards. They want to make work that gets recognition. They want to make work that they can put into their books and go get a job for an extra $100,000. They want to make work that validates their choice to do this instead of doing something else. They want to make work that they can show to their high school friends and to their parents and say, thank you for betting on me. It was a good bet. Like, what they want is what you wanted. And so to me, it's like this old notion of like, I hired you. Your job is to like please me. Your job is to read my mind. Your job is to sort of elevate my stature. Your job is to fuel my success. You are we pay you, you generate ideas. I put my touch on them. I take credit for them. And that is our value exchange. Like that. I think that's how advertising worked for 100 years. the people who I admire the most, who I enjoyed working with the most, what I aspire to be is like, I know what you want because I wanted it too. And I know what it meant when the person I worked for went to work for me to make it happen for me. And I know how that changed my life. And I know how much of a gift that felt like to me. And I know like where that person sits in my life as a result of giving me that gift. And I want to be that for you. I probably can't be it to everybody, but like that is my highest aspiration, is to be that for you. And so like when you bring me ideas, I'm not like getting off on this power trip to say no to everything because it just feels good to say no. What I'm actually doing is like, dude, how do we make one thing, get it to a meeting? Like, how do we make it easy for a client to say yes to this? How do we make this is pretty good. How do we make it great? Dude, this has a chance to win an award. How do we make the case study perfect? Like, and it's like, man, this guy's really applying his collection of talent and experiences that I don't have as a young creative. He's putting it to work for me. I'll never forget that, So I think that's my answer.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omid. And thank you so much to everyone who showed up for this talk and participated and enjoyed it. If there is any more questions for me afterwards, you can send me an email or you can call me. And we look forward to seeing you for the next talk on July 21st. Thank you, Omid. Thank you to everyone else. Thank you, Brett.
Peace.